million people around the world living under the control of human traffickers, and that number is only going to grow unless something changes. Arresting traffickers will not by itself end human trafficking. There's too much out there, and it's too complex. To fundamentally reduce the amount of trafficking, we have to change the conditions that make trafficking possible in the first place. Traffickers pinpoint what people need and pretend to give it to them. Maybe it's a job or an apartment. Maybe it's love or a sense of belonging. Traffickers target communities where the needs are greatest, communities struggling with poverty, addiction, and trauma. To disarm the traffickers, we have to create a world where those needs are met by someone other than the trafficker. That means fixing the broken systems that fail to meet those needs: foster care, housing, worker protections, education, criminal justice, to name a few. But it also means going deeper. Preventing trafficking means facing the fallout of racism, sexism, and discrimination. It means repairing the damage done by unjust and unequal policies and practices that have, over generations, led to greater needs in some communities than others. We are strengthening communities, changing norms and attitudes, and putting power in the hands of workers and vulnerable people. We are building a social justice movement to end human trafficking.
Good evening and welcome to Higher Elevations TV. My name is Ernesto Rodriguez. I am your host, and I have a special guest with me this evening. Her name is Tanisha Tate. She's a native of Washington, D.C., an empowerment coach, model, influencer, and victims advocate / human trafficking specialist. She prides herself on being a pillar in the community. She graduated from Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina, with a Bachelor's of Science in Criminal Justice in 2015, in which she has member of Benedict College Band of Distinction. She became a member of the Phi Iota Phi Dance Fraternity Incorporated in spring of 2014. She has also been a member of the Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated since 2015. In 2017, she earned a Master's of Science in Psychology with an emphasis in forensic psychology from Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, Arizona. Recently, she completed a graduate certificate in life coaching. As she continues to thrive and work in the community with both youth and adults, she embodies the essence of style and grace in everything she does. Her favorite quote to live by is, "I'd rather die with memories than to live with dreams." Tanisha, welcome to Higher Elevations TV.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And thank you again, Ernesto, for this opportunity to speak on such a dynamic topic.
Absolutely, a very important topic.
Yes.
Tanisha, for those who may not know you or know your history or your background, let's begin by telling them a little bit about the neighborhood that you were actually raised and grew up in.
Ooh. We could dive right in. The neighborhoods that I grew in, because of course, growing up in DC, I think everyone always gets the picture of it's the city life, everything's fun and great, but just like any other city, any other state, there are pockets that kind of get overlooked, and I would say that's kind of the neighborhoods I lived in, where there was poverty, where I seen the gun violence, I seen all of the low parts of living. It wasn't the best environment to grow up in. And so it was one of those things where you either dove into school and extracurriculars so that you didn't get caught up in the trouble that was outside, or you chose getting caught up in the trouble outside. So,
It sounds like the same neighborhood I grew up in. I tell you, and I also grew up in DC, and seems like nothing has changed from then to now. It's interesting. What's even more interesting, I really like to know a little more about, your upbringing and what was like in your house. Tell me about that. I'm sure people want to know about that. What was that like? Know about
oh,
the
that's the
neighborhood, but tell us about the house,
that
what you grew up in.
that's the interesting topic there. So, my mom was a single parent, so she raised five girls, so all women. So I think that's always the picture that everybody gets is like, oh, no boys, no brothers, no cousins, no nothing, no, all women.
All
And I
women.
am all girls, yes, and I am the second oldest. So it was definitely interesting. And I think as we get into it later on, one of the reasons as to why I'm probably not at home is like one of the things that's like, oh, girls, I got to run away really quick. I got to
Quickly.
clear my head. But in my household, I will say it was at times, like I said, my mom was a single parent. So at times it was a little difficult. And even just with the neighborhoods and the environments that we were in, growing up
Yeah.
in the household was kind of one of those um, just surviving. It was really surviving. And for me, my coping with it was because for me it's like I didn't want to have to be in those type of conditions or those living conditions, whatever it may be. So my coping was, oh, I'm gonna throw myself into school, or I'm gonna do education. So I probably did every sport, every extracurricular activity that the schools offered just so that I could stay busy. But it was also one of those things where I will say between me and my older sister, we pretty much raised our sisters because my mom had to work to just make sure that we had a roof over our heads, to make sure that we had food to eat, make sure that we had a way to get to
Or-
school the next day. So it was one of those things of being in school, but also being able to be there for my sisters and provide for them at the time. And of course, as we got older, things got a little bit easier. We began to develop different methods to make it lighter on each other so it wasn't too much of a load. But it was definitely interesting. I'm saying when it's all girls, it's either sink or swim.
So what was it? What was it? Were you guys stair steps? Was it a big gap between, you,
um,
your sister, and so forth?
Now the biggest gap is probably between me and the youngest one, but it was I'll probably say between maybe 2 to 3 year gap between all of us. I'll say the youngest is, but the young so I'll say I am 28 and the youngest is 7.
Wow. And
So
the sixth one.
so it's like woo, wait a minute, but yes, that is probably the biggest gap between that. But other than that, I think we're all in kind of fair range
Yeah,
from each other, so it's not too much of a gap that we can't still kind of connect and relate to certain things. But of course, we all had different aspects of seeing how we grew up and how we lived, and so I think one
of
of the
course.
biggest things me and my older sisters took on was just trying to make sure that the younger ones didn't see as much as we saw.
Gotta have the
So
next generation.
yeah,
I tell
so
you,
that was
your
definitely the
mother.
task.
I tell you, your mother must be so very proud of you. I mean, to raise six women in one house in DC. In what neighborhood did you grow up in? Part of DC, southeast, southwest, northeast, northwest.
It jumped around. I would say the longest was the northeast area. That was the longest period of time. And actually, my family is still in the northeast area.
Northeast.
So northeast was definitely where the stomping grounds were made.
Would you want to share what neighborhood that was? Like Deanwood,
um, Definitely Deanwood, Kenworth
Deanwood.
area. So
I used to live in Deanwood. I used to live
yeah,
in
so
Deanwood. Yeah.
right, so it's Deanwood, Kenworth area, and that's where they still are. So that is the longest period. Because before that, it was as far as like the northeast, it was like Lincoln Heights area.
Mhm.
Then we did move around to the southeast, so we were up there by Anacostia, and so we definitely have seen our fair share of
No doubt,
DC's
no doubt.
pockets.
I tell you, the northeast or whatever by Deanwood, I'm sure you remember they had Roper Junior High School. It was a rec center right there.
Yes.
They've actually built a brand new Deanwood Rec Center. It's just awesome with a football field, it's swimming pool. I'm sure if
I
you've seen it or
heard.
not.
I heard because my now so I have a teenager. She's currently a junior right now, and she goes to Ideal.
Mm-hmm.
So in that area, so they tell me, so they she pretty much tells me what's going on, or when I do call, she gives me the update of that area. My mom tells me as well too. So I'm like, okay, I see you growing, of
So you
course,
still
and all
connected,
of
right?
us.
You still connected. There you go. All right. Well,
Yeah.
good. I'm glad to hear that. I can imagine that neighborhood around that time period with your mother, single mother, going to work, leaving you all home by yourself. I know that the neighborhood boys were like, "Oh my God, yes, and mom is out of here," kind of thing, right?
Okay. They tried, but I think it kind of made it worse. You would probably think we were a little bit too masculine at the time. I think we kind of like, because we went into like survival mode, so it was kind of like, no, so it's not happening.
I know that's right. But you're doing so very well for yourself now. Which brings me to my next question. You have a bachelor's degree, you have a master's degree, and I'm sure by no stretch of the imagination, that was not easy.
Oh,
Share with me, your educational journey. From high school to your undergrad to graduate school. I mean, that's a lot of work.
a lot of people say that, and for me, I love learning. So
Yes.
it was for me. It wasn't as difficult as it may have seemed to others because I'm always finding myself enrolled in some type of class, somebody's school, trying to learn something or to just keep my mind busy. But I would say for me, my education journey, I actually enjoyed it. I loved it. So for high school, for me, I went to Cedar Chavez, which is a public policy school. So a
Yes.
lot of our so a lot of our classes outside of the core classes were centered around public policy, learning the history of politics and the Capitol, and actually having at the end those internships at the end of the school year to kind of just get into the community or get into those government buildings to see how things really operated. So that alone set me up for a lot of things because even for us to graduate from high school, we had to complete a thesis presentation and a paper. So that
In
alone
college.
was right. So I'm like, we did that in high school. So by the time I got to college and the papers were coming, I'm like, oh, okay, we're gonna just
Yes.
ease on by, knock this out the way, and then of course,
That
for
rhythm
my
going.
right. And so I think one of the things that I learned throughout my educational journey was once I went to Cedar Chavez, which was, of course, a mix between African Americans and Hispanics. And,
Yes.
so it was like once I went to undergrad, I went to Benedict and it's like an HBCU. So for me, I was kind of like, oh, wait. So it was kind of like for me, and I always tell people, I was like, I think at first it was kind of like a culture shock because I was like, wait a minute, what's happening here? like, I was like, pause,
What's the
I am not
diversity?
ready for me because I was just like, oh my goodness, because I was so used to like all of my friends, who were bilingual, all of my friends who were Hispanic. So I was going to like quinceañeras and everything in high school, and so then like I go to a HBCU, and it's like a whole different element. I was like, well, did I stay in the house too long? Did I like conceal myself? And so for me, going to a HBCU was definitely an experience. It was something that I
Tell me
absolutely
about that
loved.
experience.
It was definitely an experience in itself because it was so much that I feel like I learned a lot about myself, but I also developed. I feel like that's why I developed my identity because a lot of things I did at Benedict is what I carry with me today or how I carry myself today when it comes to applying myself to school and things like that. And I think HBCUs have that little bit of oomph to it that you kind of learn to survive differently as well compared to if you go to like a
Right.
PWI. You definitely learn how to survive
Yeah.
differently
Sink
at
or
an
swim. That's right.
HBCU. Right. So it's like sink or swim. So it's like, all right, you got to prepare yourself for what's going to happen. And then once I got to grad school, I was like, okay, I can do this. And at that point, I think the only thing that changed for me in grad school was just the amount of papers that I had to do because there was like a paper due every week. And I was like, this is not life because I didn't do this in undergrad. They didn't give us this many papers. I was like, we sat
Oh
in there, we
no.
talked about it. But now, and I can say now I'm sitting here like, oh, but I want to go back to school. And I just keep trying to go back. And I'm like, you just sit down. It's okay. But
Can't get enough of school, can you?
that actually no, and my sisters and my family said it all the time. But they're like, I promise you, give her again, she's gonna be enrolled in school again. And I'm like, oh, I've been like 1 year strong, so I'm like, let me be great.
What do you think about maybe a doctorate degree?
Yes, yeah.
That's what I'm talking. Lifelong learner. What will you argue as your thesis? What would you study?
That's what. So I still want to be in the psychology
Psychology field?
field, and so for me, what I did want to explore more of is because the thesis I wrote in undergrad, which was disproportionate minority contact for the juveniles in prison, and so that is definitely something that I continue to explore because I stayed within the criminal justice field. Even once I did my graduate and it was forensic psych, it was still just learning the mind of offenders, learning the mind of different people, whether they committed crimes or how they operated. So now it's just like I was looking into the same thing. I'm like, well, I still want to look at the disproportionate minority contact amongst juveniles in the prison system nationally and see what it looks like now, what it looks like today, and how we can better assess or better even track that data so that it's not that it looks like African American juveniles or African American youth are getting arrested at a higher rate than than a Caucasian or anything like that, when we also know that the numbers are more closer than we think. But it's somewhere along the line where they're tracking that data, that research seems to get lost, and it always looks like African Americans are committing higher crimes at a quicker rate than it is a Caucasian male or a Caucasian female.
So you're suggesting that the numbers are closer?
I am. Because when you actually take the time to actually look at who's committing the crimes and what crimes there are, and actually go through a detailed analysis of the rate in which the crime is happening. So it's quicker for, and I hate to say it, but it's quicker for, society to catch an African American who may just fit a quick description and pin it on them, versus actually going through and seeing that it could have been someone else with the same description. But it's like, it's easier, like, oh, if I'm writing down, oh, they fit this description, I could take them in for it, and you put it on them. And we have so many that are in the system who did not commit a crime, or they've committed crimes that warrant just putting them on probation versus putting them in the prison for a long sentence term, thus affecting the data that we see now.
That's interesting. I'm the CEO for a nonprofit, plug for Human Resources Achievement Program. Our mission is partly to break the pipeline from school to prison. And, we spend a lot of time looking into that history of, why young African Americans, or even Latinos or people of color, are so, I guess, why the numbers are higher in the inner city than it is in, say, Iowa or Montana or somewhere else. So there's a lot involved in that. But I won't go into all that. But I will tell you this:
right.
Talk about the crimes and all that in our neighborhoods. Right there on Addison Road, right around the corner from and folks don't know DC, and this is in DC, but this is right around the corner from Roper. Addison Road comes down to Maryland and goes right into DC by Roper.
Yep.
There used to be a bakery. There used to be a Wonder Bread store in that corner. I think I might have been like 16 or 17. And I was coming from down. There's apartments right up there. Coming down the hill. Police, like 6 of them, pulled me over, got me in the car, took me back to the Wonder Bread shop. And they just walked in and said, "Is that him?" And it's a Chinese lady. All she had to say was, "Yep, that was him," and that could have changed my whole life. And that's how quick it is for, when you're a person of color. We all look alike, and the police see the first person who looks like that, and it happens. But anyway, I'll digress. So you are officially a human trafficking specialist. How do you get into that field?
Listen, it fell into my lap, because that's literally how it happened. Because so what happened?
Tell me about that.
So I went in 2018. I went on an interview at the Department of Juvenile Justice, and so I went on an interview. No, in 2018.
Oh, in 2018. No. Okay.
Right. So I went on an interview at the Department of Juvenile Justice, and it was like for a victim service coordinator. And so I'm like, okay, all right. So that's what the work I want to do is victim advocacy, and I'll go into it. And so it was like, once I got hired and I got in there, and so I learned the ins and outs of what was happening, it was kind of like, oh, hey, well, yeah, you're going to handle human trafficking. And I'm like, oh, wait, that's interesting.
Just like that.
Right. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's new. All right, cool. What is it? So at that time, because I was like, oblivious, I'm like, oh, wait. And of course, as many people do, they're like, oh, that's like taken, like when they just be snatching kids, so like you say an answer and you're just like, oh, that's what that is. I'm going to be handling that. I'm like, well, why am I handling that in South Carolina? Like, why is that something that we need to do? And so once it fell into my lap, it was one of those things where I told myself that I had to study it. I had to learn what it was. I needed to understand it better, because along with that came, eventually you're going to have to, train the rest of the staff at the agency. You're going to have to educate the community. You're going to have to sit in rooms with people who have been battling this issue for years and speak on how this agency is combating it. You're going to have to do X, Y, and Z. So I was like, okay. So it was one of those things of learning what it was, how it impacted, South Carolina, how it impacted the United States, because it's something we often see as just an international issue. We don't think that it can happen nationally. And so once it fell into my lap, I was like, okay. And so then I became a part of like community groups that were fighting against it, that were going to, the state house to try to put in those bills and those laws to sit right there and combat human trafficking, especially for South Carolina, because it came quicker than they thought. It was something that came here and they're like, wait, we have absolutely nothing in place to handle an issue of this magnitude. So let's pull together kind of like all of the agency heads. Let's pull together specialists. Let's make a training. Let's make sure that we make everyone aware that this is something that's happening. But now we have to all put our heads together and better put in place resources of how we can combat this on different levels. And so
this is the Department of Justice scrambling to put all this together.
Yeah, the Department of Juvenile Justice, yes, they were scrambling because we were getting youth, and at the time they were seeing things that they didn't necessarily know how to identify. It was like we were getting youth between the Department of Juvenile Justice and the Department of Social Services. They were getting youth that were having all these signs of human trafficking, but everybody was kind of like, what is happening? Like, what is this? It was something new. And what we ended up learning at some point in time was that a lot of people did not know, like, everybody had that notion that this is kind of something that only happens internationally. This is something where if you send your child on a plane or you go somewhere and they snatch you, then you never see your kid again. When in reality, it was something that was happening literally in everybody's front yard, backyard, in their home, and nobody knew.
Wow. So when you talked about, the fell in your lap, right? And you had to train other staff members. Did they send you to training? Did they provide you some kind of guidance? So they trained you up. So it's like train the trainer in a sense.
Right. So it was like a lot of training that was set up. It was a lot of connections that were made, in which I end up meeting. At the time, I end up meeting. Her name is Karen Moorhead. She works here, and she's one of the top human trafficking advocates, pillars for South Carolina. But because she also seen it internationally, she's worked in this field for years, and she definitely has provided training for South Carolina, but also across the state, to train and educate other people on an issue that she has been combating for years, that she has put in fought for so many bills to be passed. Like, she was literally in the nuts and bolts of human trafficking. And so once I got to meet with her and connect with her, and she connected me with other people, and then the meetings kept happening, then there was trainings being offered, and there was more specialists and people coming in saying, here's what this issue is, here's where we're at, here's things that need to happen. And so different teams and different groups and different disciplinary teams were made to make sure that literally they could cross all their T's and dot all their I's when it came to handling human trafficking.
Wow. I can't imagine, well, I guess I can, it's something as horrendous as that. And, trying to pull people together from this, sector or this skill set or what have you, and could try to come up with solutions and strategies for all that, and that's quite impressive to be on, at that ground level, learning all of that. So I guess right now you consider subject matter expert.
I probably wouldn't go to expert, but I would definitely say I am well knowledgeable in it, because I have done my fair share of training agencies. I've done my fair share of talking to youth at schools, and making sure that that education piece is definitely understood when it comes to what is human trafficking, and understanding the dynamics of it, because it is something that is, and many experts would say, it is something that is hard to identify. It is something that is hard to catch. And, the best we can do is sit right there and educate the community and actually let them know what's going on, or how they can see some of the signs, or what resources they can use to even just address the issue, because it is something that is a little bit hard to identify in certain aspects.
What do you say to children about that? I mean, how do you explain something like, like that to a child. That's, you know,
That, and that's the hard,
and you comprehend it.
and that's definitely one of the toughest ways, because it's like, how do you tell a child, oh, hey, you know, be careful of what you're doing because there's possibly someone watching you do it and they're eventually going to try to prey on you. And so you just have to use the language carefully, because you don't want to scare them away so quickly, because we know that kids, if we think about it, that kids can easily shut out something if it's something that they don't feel would ever impact them, or they're like, oh, it's not going to happen to me. So you definitely have to meet them where they at, and you have to make it more so of a conversation versus, let's say, if I stand in a room full of adults, it's me kind of with PowerPoints, with numbers, with, you know, information like that, just telling them what it is. Whereas though with youth, it's having a conversation of what could happen or what is happening, and them being more so aware of their surroundings and their behaviors and things that they make publicly known. Because like, once we look into human trafficking, it's literally how you present yourself, in which a trafficker uses that to kind of prey on you and pull it out of you, and kind of initially make that first step to pull you into the cycle that eventually at some point becomes hard to break.
Now, that's interesting. I remember growing up, and it's probably the same thing in every black family's home. My mom would not let me get out of sight. It gets dark, or if I have to go somewhere, I got to go with one of my brothers or something. They was always afraid someone was going to tape somebody. Right. So in essence, it seemed like human trafficking has been going on way longer than what people are making it seem now. Right?
That is so true, and I kind of believe I at this point I would wish that parents were still the same way, were still the same way. Like, you know, like, and granted, it's not the best way, but you kind of wish like parents were still kind of like, don't go too far, somebody gonna snatch you. Like, you know, give them that type of energy.
Yeah.
But it's like, you know, you have parents who are kind of just like, oh, that's not happening because that can't happen here, and it's like, oh, goodness, no, but it can, and it is.
I did the same thing with my children. Where y'all going? I need to see you.
Okay.
Stay where I can see you.
My mom did the same thing. She's like, y'all better beat me in the house. You absolutely right. Like, we will definitely be home before you. Got it. Like, yeah.
All right, so let me ask you, you know, there's different types of human trafficking. You know, there's sex trafficking, there's sex trafficking, there's domestic trafficking, and all these other ones, right? What's really like the difference between them all? I mean, they said, oh, it just kind of looked into human trafficking. You know, talk a little about that.
So human trafficking is kind of just like the umbrella. It's like, here's what it is. It's under, all of it is human trafficking. Now it just depends on what kind. So they primarily break it down under sex trafficking, and then labor trafficking. And so they both are, of course, entities in which the trafficker or which victims are pulled in to do some type of act against their will. And so the only difference is are they working against their will, or are they doing sexual acts against their will? And so that's primarily how they work. Now, when you talk about domestic, that's just more so saying that it is within the states. It's not something that's only international. It's something that can happen from state to state. It's something that can literally happen along the East Coastline because of the water, because of the travel, because of the tourists. So it's not necessarily where traffickers are getting kids or getting individuals from the United States and they're putting them into a foreign country. It's literally, I can get someone from South Carolina and I can go traffic them in Florida, or I can get someone from DC and I can go traffic them in New York. And so that's kind of just the difference, whether it's I'm going to make them do labor, I'm going to make them do work, which labor trafficking is often seen as some people will automatically go to sweatshops. And so, but we also have to look at modern day. That's not always the case. You have to look into nail salons. You have to look into massage, spa and massage parlors, because that is also where it's happening as well. You have to look into those places of work where you may have a worker who may not say more than 2 words, because at that point they may be forced to work in that environment that they don't want to. And so labor is literally being forced to work in a situation where you're not getting no pay, or the pay that you are getting is going directly to the trafficker, or they pulled you in because they're threatening you or threatening your family, saying, well, hey, you need to provide for me and my family. And if you provide for me and my family, then I'll make sure that your family or your child has a roof over their head. So there's a lot of things that go into that when you're looking at labor. But then there's sex trafficking, where you're pulling in, individuals, and you're forcing them to perform sexual acts against their will, or you're drugging them to perform sexual acts. And so that can look like a trafficker can set up a hotel, or they can set up an apartment. They can set up a remote building, and they may have girls locked in the room and tell them they can't leave the room or see their child until they've had sex with probably 30 guys or more a day, because each customer to them that's coming in is paying for that service, paying for that sexual act. And then some, of course, they sit right there and they make this to them, this is a business. So they can make it where as though it's different levels to it. There's different sexual acts that may cost more money. And so literally they're putting that threat, that force, and everything else over their victim's head to make them feel like that is something that they have to do.
So what do you say to people who say then that, because you mentioned earlier, it sounds like a quid pro quo in a sense, or, barter, trade. You do something for me in terms of the labor trafficking. You do something for me, I do something for you. So it's people will say, well, that's not, trafficking or labor trafficking. It's a fair exchange. What do you say to someone like that?
It's not a fair exchange, because it's different than, here's the difference. It's different than if I go apply to a job and they give me my description of my job and duties, of course, and here's my set pay. My working conditions are suitable enough for me to complete my job. My duties are, I am capable to fulfill those, and I don't feel a level of stress or anything that may make me feel that I can't do it, or I'm not put in a place where I'm threatened to sign up for that job. That is me at will saying, I'm applying here as the person saying, okay, well, we're going to hire you. And at that point, I still have autonomy over my decisions that I make, over the skills that I produce for that job, over the pay, the benefits, the insurance. Whereas that labor trafficking is, I'm going to pull somebody in, and I may sit right there and I may coerce them into saying, oh no, well, if you work for me, you can get X, Y, and Z. But then they get into it and they're working for them, and they're probably making 10 cents an hour. Or they're probably working in conditions that are very poor, where there may not be no air, no heat. They probably can't get a lunch break. They're probably working hours, 10, 12 hours a day, and not seeing none of their paychecks, because they've been promised the life that they're never going to receive. And now they're stuck in it, because now they're receiving threats to their family or threats of their life. And so the conditions are definitely different when we're talking about what it is that labor trafficking is, because you have to think of the work conditions that they're putting them in. But you also have to understand that when people are getting pulled into human trafficking, there's a method to it. Traffickers have a method. They've literally developed a method into how they're pulling individuals in, which also at some point, once, let's say, you get a victim and you try to pull them out, it makes it harder, because now they've been coerced to do something, or they've been lied to about something, or they're being forced to do it, and they don't think that there's no way out of it.
And this is another question. Have you seen cases, or heard of cases where, a young person is, kidnapped, introduced and forced into human trafficking, and let's say 3-4 years, whatever length of time has gone past, and they become so normalized to it that they don't want to leave, and then they're in turns now bringing, I guess, teaching other young persons in there how the game. Is that something that's not common?
That is definitely something that is common. That is definitely something that currently happens, and it happens at a rate that is far more unlike, like, not many people like it. Because what happens is, let's say if a trafficker pulls in a female at the age of 11, right? You pulled her in at an age where her personality is still developing, her mental state is still developing, and at some point the trafficker used some method to pull her in. So let's say if this 11-year-old didn't like being at home, and she went to school, and she probably told all her friends, or she acted as if she didn't like being at home, or she purposely stayed away from home. And so the trafficker uses that at that point to pull them in, because that trafficker go to the 11-year-old was like, well, I can offer you a better life. You don't like that home. It's like they give them conversation. They meet them where they're at. And so that's where that whole coercion piece come in. That's where the whole fraud piece come in, because the trafficker is presenting as a safety net compared to what it is that the other person doesn't like. So if you pull an 11-year-old in at a time where they're still developing mentally and emotionally, at that point, to a trafficker, that's their ideal person, because they can mold them, they can shape them, they can get them to believe that whatever pain that they may cause them is something that they did. And so that person continues to try to correct themselves so that they can please the trafficker, so that they can sit right there and not receive the pain that may come from it. And so after a while, that's years down the line, they're constantly trying to please their trafficker because that's what's been instilled to them. And at some point, they develop a dependent relationship upon that trafficker. So
Wow.
then at some point, once it got to the point where the trafficker is satisfied with what it is that victim may have presented to them, it's like, oh, well, I'm going to now promote you. So now you're kind of like my top girl, right? And so it's like now you're kind of the person who you become the mom to the other girls who come in. Now you become the person training them, because now at this point, the trafficker has a nurturer. The trafficker has someone with instincts who can pull in young women at a vulnerable state, or young men at a vulnerable state, and provide them the safety net that was provided to them. And so sometimes that happens where you have those who kind of progress or go up in hierarchy to the trafficker, and now you become the person recruiting others for them. And so now it gets to the point where now the trafficker hands is off of it, right? And so it's like they're thinking smart, and they're constantly developing ways in which it makes it harder to track what's going on. Because if you pull someone and you kind of ask them, you ask them the questions about being trafficked, you ask them, or you try to explain to them the situation, they'll probably more than likely say, no, that's not what happened, because he or she takes care of me. They provide for me. To them, at that point, that's the mindset that they've developed. They make sure that I eat. They make sure I have somewhere to sleep. They make sure that I'm comfortable at night, or they give me clothes, or they give me this. And so it's kind of hard to unwire that, because at that point, their identity has been disturbed. And that's what a lot of victims face, which is that identity disturbance, because now they don't know who they are outside of the life that they've been forced to live for so many years. So they go back to it even if you pull them out.
Interesting. Now you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but I'd like for you to expand a little bit on that. And for young people listening, pay attention to this. Talk to me about how these traffickers target these young people.
They're looking now in this day and age, social media. They are looking at social media. They are creating profiles that are, that would appeal to be around their age. They are creating this whole persona to pour in views to kind of get their attention. It could go from a random person liking a picture, or liking all your pictures on your page. Right now the youth are kind of driven by likes and shares and views and comments. And so it can be as simple as a trafficker portraying to be someone who seeks interest in that person, who may sit there and they like, oh, I want to like all your pictures, or oh, now I'm going to send you a message. Oh, how are you? How is this? Or what's going on? And because unfortunately youth are at an age or at a point where they have not developed healthy boundaries to understanding like privacy, it gets to the point where they have no boundary or no limit into sharing the inside of their life. So at that point, it's kind of you're giving, or they're giving the trafficker what it is that they need to kind of sit right there and kind of hit them with the punchline later of, oh, well,
Right.
come with me because I can provide this, or giving them false hope of relationships. And so with a lot of them, you will see even with girls, let's say if the trafficker is a male, a lot of them at some point, they will look at their trafficker as their boyfriend, as their dad, as someone, that literally is taking care of them, who they think in their mind has formed a healthy relationship. Traffickers watch. They watch, even if it can be someone who may sit outside of school and watch the behavior of one kid. If it's a person who may be by themselves all the time, or watching homes. But one of the things that people have to also realize is that traffickers happen in families as well.
What do you mean?
So at one point in time, so let's just say, and I'll base it off of South Carolina so I can give an explanation. Because at one point in time in South Carolina, one of the highest rates in which trafficking was happening was within families. So you have to look at low income families. You have to look at the circumstances of these families. So it would get to a point it's where you may have a parent who is addicted to drugs, and they will sell their child so that they can get their next fix. And so there are so many factors that go into how trafficking can start, because it's not, I'm gonna trade you from state to state. It can be a cousin who may come in. It could be an uncle who may come in, and they may owe people money. They may need to get their next fix. They may just want to make money, and they will have no problem. And that's the hardest part, is when it's family, because you trust family.
Yeah.
You're kind of like, oh no, that's my uncle. And so your uncle could tell you something and pull you right into something.
Yep. Yep.
And at that point it's happening. And even if you're looking at African American families or minority families, it's kind of the culture of what stays in this house, or what happens in this house stays in this house. So when I say that human trafficking is kind of sometimes hard to follow, it's hard to follow because there's so many factors into how things got pulled in, and then also being able to clearly define when trafficking is happening.
And it seems like it could be in any part of society. It could be in your family, it could be at school, it could be in your job, it could be in the gym, it could be anywhere. Wow. So with that said, we know that human trafficking is an international crime committed all over the world. Here in the United States, race plays a big part of everything in the United States. Can you talk to me about, who's impacted by most by human trafficking, and does race play a role in that?
Okay. So according to like the FBI and their statistics and how they look at it. So right now, the youngest age that they're looking at that are impacted the most are between 11 to 14. Those are the youngest ages that are impacted the most, because that is the age in which a trafficker can mold the person into what they want them to be. Now, when you're looking at race can play a factor, because to a trafficker, automatically they will go and assume that minorities, because of maybe living circumstances or environments, the social economic class, they can easily play and manipulate their victims. They can easily play onto those adversities that victim may be facing. So if it's a person who, let's say if it's a young girl who may have to be raising all of her siblings or something, and she gets tired of it, and a trafficker, they literally watch. And so it's like it takes a while. It's not like let me see this one time and let me grab or anything like that, because it's not a grabbing. It's not a let me just snatch you up in the back of a van. It's let me have a conversation with you, because let me pull you in, because traffickers know it's the difference between let me kidnap you versus, oh no, they wanted to come with me.
Right.
So
regardless that's all right, but he's only 10 years old though.
Exactly. So
really?
and that's where a lot of lawmakers, that's what a lot of politicians, that's what a lot of criminal justice professionals are battling, is like making sure that those lines are clearly defined when it comes to making sure that they can pull in a human trafficker, or that they can use those clearly defined lines to say, nope, this was human trafficking, regardless of whether you snatched them or you coerced them into it. But it definitely looks at race. Race does play a role, because when you look at it, it varies sometimes. At one point in time, you would always see, at first, Caucasians were at the forefront of human trafficking. We would always see just, young.
As the victims or?
As victims. You will always see, like, if you looked at how it was portrayed in media, if you looked at when it came about, it was always at first, let's say, young Caucasian women who were kind of like on the face of like the victims that of what's happening. But at that time, a lot of things were kind of getting missed where it came to minorities being pulled in, and looking at social economic class and how that plays a factor to easily pull in minorities, or pull in, like Hispanics or those populations. Because if you think about pulling in, let's say, Hispanics or anyone of like brown, nationality, pulling them in, at that point, you play on a lot of their vulnerabilities, which is, hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to call immigration services. Or if you don't do this, I'm going to do this. Or you may have immigrants who come over and they're like, oh, well, I can provide you this life. And they know no better because they're coming to a new place. And it's like, oh, well, this person's going to help me. And then at that point, they're put into something that they can now, can't get out of as easily as you would expect them to. So looking at race and economic status definitely plays a factor into how human traffickers literally prey on their subjects and pull them in.
In essence, they prey on the weak.
It is.
So here we are in the DMV, I read about cases that's been in the news even recently. People taken and they found them in Baltimore and all this and that. Can you talk to us a little bit about, the different methods and identifying factors of human trafficking?
So when it comes to trying to identify human trafficking, one of the things that people can look for when they're identifying it, and probably one of the I don't want to say quickest ways, but one of the more alert ways is that traffickers like branding their work at that point. For lack of better words, they do. Whether it's a tattoo, whether it's a scar, whether it's, imprinting on them in some way. Literally, that's how traffickers operate, is like to imprint on the people that they're pulling in. So it can be
Branding
looking
them.
for, right, it really branding them, because it can be looking for those identifying marks on them, tattoos that they may not have, or you can look at, let's say if you see a 13-year-old and she's dressed probably way too provocative for her age at
Yeah.
that time, then at some point, there's a possibility that someone is pulling, those strings, or someone is presenting her in a manner that they would like, because they can have revenue from it. So when you're looking at, branding, you're looking at appearance of how they may be dressed, but also looking at how they may interact, because what a trafficker will do is script. They will give all of their victims a script, because you can start to notice it in interviews where if you ask a question, they automatically have a response to it, or they already are prepared. So it's kind of like they prepare them for, if you come in contact with law enforcement or you come in contact with any authorities, here's what you say. And all of that is kind of making sure you keep my name out your mouth, so that I don't get caught, or you take the rap for it, go to prison and come back. But it's also looking at it in the hospital system, the hospitals. So what a lot of resources and a lot of groups are doing now, are training nurses and hospital staff to be able to identify it, because one of the reasons, or the highest reason, that trafficking is at number 2 for as national crimes is
Right.
because if you're looking at a human and you're looking at a human body, it is also easier to fix. It is also easier something to put back together. And so a trafficker is like, oh, well, if they get an STD or if they get OD or they something like this, drop them off at the hospital, pack them up, put them back to work.
Wow. I mean, this is
And that's how
clearly.
you can keep going. And so, and that's how they go. That's how it works for longevity for human trafficking. Is because you can sit right there and you can pack up a human body. You can poke holes, you can stuff it, and you can put it right back to where it needs to go, so that it can continue to give you the revenue that they're seeking at that time. And so, one of those things is looking at frequent hospital visits or clinic visits and things
Yes.
like that, to make sure if you're treating a 13-year-old for STD, how is that possible at that time? If you're sitting right there treating a 14-year-old or a 12-year-old for a pregnancy, how is that possible? Or even for young men, because what a lot of people overlook is that young men are getting pulled into it just as quickly as females. But men, what the hardest thing is that men don't want to speak up about it. That's not something that they want to attest to. That's not something that they want to admit to. So, but it's also, when you're looking at them, it's looking at branding, it's looking at appearance, it's looking at frequent hospital visits, it's looking at how they may talk to you, how they may converse with you, if they may even make eye contact with authorities or anyone who is not their trafficker. There's a lot of body cues when it comes to human trafficking to look out for, versus necessarily, oh, can I identify this really quickly? Hey, are you being trafficked? That's not going to happen, because the first thing they're going to do is divert. because they've already been prepared to avoid those questions, or they've already been prepared to answer them and not get anyone caught.
You know, this is a classic example of modern day slavery. Everything you talked about, the branding, the brainwashing, the psychological effects of all of that. Man, these kids gonna be, you know, affected by this for the rest of their life. Can you talk to me about some resources that are out there for them?
So, and of course, and so resources very dependent on the state. So now what we're seeing is that states are now making or now developing homes for human trafficking victims. So the same way that there may be a domestic violence shelter, or there may be a home for women of domestic violence, there are now places being developed for human trafficking victims, for them to receive that treatment, for them, because that is a lot of trauma to unfold. That is a lot of work that has to be put in. And so what happens is, even with situations like that, you can't put too many victims at that time in one place. So you have to think about it, in a way of, if you put a lot of human trafficking victims in one setting, what they eventually end up doing is, because they're all in the mindset of their trafficker did nothing wrong, they get to the point where they can team up, connect, and they could leave. And so what the battle is when it comes to providing those resources for victims is that you don't want to put them in a locked environment, because they're already locked in. They're
Already.
already in a prison that was made for them. So you can't put them in places like that. But it's making sure that they have resources when it comes to proper medical care, when it comes to therapy, when it comes to proper shelter and those connections, and actually giving them life skills. Because a lot of them don't have life skills. A lot of them are undeveloped in social skills and being able to fully take care of themselves, because they got pulled in to do one job only. And so giving them social skills, giving them life skills was at the bottom of the list when it came to making them a victim. And so when you're looking at those resources, it's putting them in those classes and providing them with that ability to know that they're capable of doing other things outside of selling their body, or outside of exerting their body in labor conditions that aren't conducive to them in the long run. So each state has it differently as far as those resources that they give to them and that they provide to them. But a lot of states are trying to make sure that they're making environments that literally cultivate that level of support that they need, because that's intent at that point, that's intensive care. That's intensive therapy that they're going to need. That's intensive help and support to make sure that you can undo all of the damage that has been done, because that's years of something, or that's months of living one way and being told that that's the only way that you can live.
I tell you, I've learned so much in the last hour, and this is not a subject we can just talk, for 1 hour. I can have you back every week, and I'm sure we can continue the conversation for another hour and another hour, because there's always going to be somebody abducted, somebody taken, and whatever. So the conversation will go forever. Last question, I think.
Okay.
um, at some point, all of us gonna pass away and leave this earth, right?
Right.
Obviously, if you live in it right and you got the finances in order, you can leave money, you can leave a house, you can leave cars, you can leave insurance, and all of this, right, to the next generation. But if you were not able to leave any of those things, but you were able to leave three principles for succeeding in life, in your career, as a business owner, entrepreneur, what three principles will you leave to the next generation, and why?
Okay. Oh, that's a good question. Listen,
Thank you.
that's a good question. Oh man.
I know you got some good
So
answers. I know you got some.
so if I could leave those three principles, it would be, one for me would always be, believe in yourself. So believe and trust in yourself, because you are already equipped with the tools that you have to succeed. You just have to tap into them. And so that is probably one of the biggest principles that I would sit right there and say. It's like, truly believe in who you are and what you want to be and where you want to go. Because once you can believe in yourself, then when you get the responses of no, or you get the responses of not right now, you also know that that's not the end and that's not your limit because you know what you're capable of. So definitely believe in yourself. Trust in who you are becoming. So
Yes.
stop being afraid of who you are becoming. Trust your growth and trust your process. Because granted, it may be a rocky road. It's going to have its ups and downs, and it's not going to be uphill the whole time. But you have to trust that each obstacle you face is doing nothing but building the armor you're going to need to face all of your obstacles coming up. So that once you
Right.
get to the top of that hill, you can take that armor off and you can say you made it. Trust in yourself.
That's right. That's on my
Okay.
chest,
Trust.
right?
Okay. Listen, and use your fear as your fuel. That is probably one of
Mm,
the biggest things. Use your fear as your fuel. We're so afraid of fear and failing that we sit right there and allow ourselves to be in a box. But if we actually took the fear that we held and used it as our fuel to tackle everything that we have, we become bigger than the fears that are going to come before us. We absolutely
right.
become bigger than them. So once you get to the point where you use your fear as your fuel, then you're unstoppable. Because what can stop you? Once you know that you beat your own fears, because a lot of fears are created in our own heads. It's not because of anything around us. We create our own fears. And once you've used that fear and you put it in your gas tank, you're gonna sit right there and you're gonna trust your process and you're gonna believe in yourself. And you're gonna sit right there and carry on a life that you felt was worth living. And that's why I always tell myself I'd rather live with memories than to die with dreams because I know that I
Please.
pushed
I love it.
myself.
I love it. I love it. I mean, you dropped so many nuggets and jewels tonight. If someone wants to get in touch with you later on, and may have some questions, just want to reach out. How can they reach you? Your social media, your website, and I know you have different businesses. You're also a life coach. If you can take this last couple of minutes and floor is all yours to talk about it, to talk about these things, and how can people get in touch with you?
Okay, so and to get in touch with me, social media is probably the best way because I respond back quicker on social media. So on Instagram, it is Tanisha Michelle, and on Facebook, it is Tanisha Michelle, and there's also a business page on Facebook as well called I Fit Just Fine, which is my life coaching business, and that is literally probably why I do what I do and everything that I do. And so follow me, ask me
That's
questions because I love answering questions. I love talking. I love being on a platform where I can educate but also empower the people around me. So, Tanisha Michelle on all social media platforms, you will find me there. And then I Fit Just Fine. You will find that on all social media platforms as well. And so those are the quickest ways. And then, of course, if you just want to shoot me an email, you can at ifitjustfine@gmail.com.
Tell me about I Fit Just Fine real quick. What is that? I mean, I
So
know
I
how much you up, but my audience doesn't know.
So I think Just Fine started out as a blog at a time where I was trying to find myself. I was trying to define myself and who I wanted to be. And of course, like many people, we always live in a place where we compare ourselves to society's timeline. And we're always like, well, I'm not here yet. This person is here. Or why am I not there yet? And we always watch everybody else's growth and question why we aren't moving. And so at one point, I had to tell myself that I fit just fine where I am. I'm moving at the pace that I need to move. And so that was something that at some point it went from a blog of just talking about, hey, it's okay where you are, move at your pace, to it became a life coaching business where I empower youth every day to not get so boggled down about what's happening around them, but understanding that developing who you are and your personality is what's going to get you where you need to go. And so I work with a lot of youth and I work with a lot of women on different platforms just to kind of embrace yourself, embrace where you are, and trust where you're going. And that's literally how I Fit Just Fine operates.
I love it. You heard it right here on HGTV. I Fit Just Fine. Miss Tanisha Michelle, thank you so much for taking the time to spend this evening with us. And I'm sure my audience enjoyed it. Lastly, if you enjoyed tonight's episode, if you learned something new, and would like to support this channel, please like us on Facebook, on Instagram. Definitely click on the gram for us. We're also on YouTube. If you want to become a sponsor of this channel, please email HETV channel at gmail.com, HETV channel at gmail.com. And I'd like to quickly just acknowledge some of our sponsors, Nonprofit Human Resources Achievement Program. The next one is JAE Consultant and Real Estate Improvement Group Network, who are sponsors for tonight's event. Tanisha, this has been a powerhouse of information. I hope I can bring you back at a later time and we can continue this great and important topic and conversation. Thank you so much. I'll leave you the last words.
Thank you so much, Ernesto. It was such an honor and it was such a pleasure to get on here and talk about it and educate. And that is exactly what I love to do, is educate and empower. So I just want to leave this with everyone, is that, and I love doing it because I do it with all my groups, and I make sure I tell everyone if I end anything is, I am enough today as I was yesterday, and I will be tomorrow. And I hope that everybody has a great evening and they enjoyed the conversation. Again, you can contact me on social media platforms if you have any more conversations or anything that you would like to have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Until next episode, always seek higher elevations. Take care. Good night.